All right, today we're putting on our detective hats and opening up a case file that's literally 2,000 years old, the New Testament. And the central mystery we're trying to solve is this. After all this time, can we actually trust that the book we hold in our hands today is what was originally written? Let's get into it.
So here's the heart of the problem, right? For most of its life, the New Testament wasn't mass-produced on a printing press. Nope, it was copied, letter, by hand. You can almost imagine it, a scribe hunched over a scroll. So after centuries of what is essentially a high-stakes game of telephone, how can we possibly know if we're still reading the original message?
To even start to crack this case, we've got to understand the sheer scale of the challenge. We're not just talking about one book. We're talking about a story that was passed down through collapsing empires and across entire continents.
Just let that number sink in. 1,500 years. From the time the apostles were writing, all the way up to the 1500s when the printing press came along, the only way to make a new copy of, say, the Gospel of John was for someone to sit down and write it all out. That is a ton of time for human error, a tired eye, a slip of the pen, to creep in and potentially change things. So, how in the world do we investigate this? Well, just like any good detective story, we have to rely on the clues left behind, and of course, the experts who know how to read them. Let's take a look at the evidence. Okay, so the main pieces of evidence are called manuscripts. These are the actual, physical, handwritten documents from way back when. And scholars who study these, like Dr. Dan Wallace, are kind of like modern-day Indiana Joneses. Seriously, they travel all over the globe, digging through old monasteries and libraries to find and photograph these priceless clues.
And the process they use is just incredibly meticulous. First, they find every copy they can get their hands on. Then, they compare them. We're talking letter for letter, word for word. And every single time they find a difference, no matter how small, they log it. These little differences are called variants, and they are the absolute key to solving this whole mystery.
And this is where our investigation hits what looks like a giant brick wall. Because when scholars started comparing all these manuscripts, they didn't just find a few little typos here and there. Oh no, they found a lot of them. We're talking hundreds of thousands of spots where one ancient copy says something different from another one. Now, on the surface, that sounds absolutely devastating, right? It sounds like that game of telephone went horribly, horribly wrong. In fact, some of the most recent estimates put the total number of these variants across all the known Greek manuscripts at around 1.5 million. Yeah, you heard me right. 1.5 million. And this is the exact question people ask. It's totally fair. With over 1 million discrepancies, it just feels like a historical disaster. How could anyone possibly piece together the original text from what seems like a complete and utter mess?
But, and this is the big twist in our detective story, that gigantic, terrifying number isn't the problem we think it is. Not even close. Because when our detectives actually start analyzing what these variants are, they find something pretty amazing.
And this chart says it all. It turns out that over 99% of those 1.5 million variants are completely meaningless. We're talking about simple spelling differences like the ancient equivalent of spelling color with or without a U, or obvious, nonsensical mistakes, or just using a synonym, like one copy says Jesus Christ and another says Christ Jesus. The tiny fraction of variants that actually change the meaning in any way and could possibly be original, well, that's less than 1%.
So what does one of those super rare, meaningful variants even look like? Well, here's a classic example. In one of Paul's letters, did he say the apostles were gentle or little children? The two Greek words are just one letter off and probably sounded identical when read aloud. Now, it's a really interesting debate for scholars, for sure. But look at what it doesn't do. It doesn't change a single core teaching of Christianity.
And just for fun, to show you what a nonsense error looks like, there's one very late copy of that same verse that says the apostles became horses. Yeah, horses. It's obviously just a goofy scribal error that every scholar on the planet immediately dismisses. It's just noise.
Look, you don't have to take my word for it. This quote is from Bart Ehrman. He's a famous New Testament scholar, and he's also an agnostic. He's one of the biggest critics out there. And even he admits that not one essential Christian doctrine is affected by any of these variants. That's a huge deal. So, that brings us to the end of our investigation. We've looked at all the clues, the good, the bad, and the horsey. So what's the final verdict? Can we trust this text? The verdict is just incredibly clear. As experts like Dr. Wallace confirm, the core beliefs of Christianity are rock solid. Things like the deity of Christ, the resurrection, the Trinity. Not a single one of these ideas hangs by a thread on some weird, questionable verse in one obscure manuscript. They are found consistently across the board.
And here's the final amazing twist. That massive number of manuscripts, the thing that at first seemed like the biggest weakness, is actually the text's greatest strength. Having thousands of copies allows scholars to cross-reference everything, to build family trees of documents, and to spot where and when changes happened. It gives them an incredible, almost uncanny confidence in knowing what the original said.
So, our 2,000-year-old case is pretty much closed. The evidence overwhelmingly shows that the New Testament we read today is a stunningly accurate copy of the original. And that really leaves us with a much bigger, much more personal question. If we can be this sure about what the text says, what are we going to do with the message it contains?